Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was February 1996, and the worst blizzard in over a century had swallowed up the tiny mountain town of Red Ash, Montana. People there were used to snow, even welcomed it, but this storm was different. It came like an avalanche from the sky, unexpected and violent, cutting off the town from the rest of the world within hours. Roads vanished, power lines snapped under the weight of ice, radio towers failed, the town was silenced beneath 6 feet of snow, and the only thing that moved was the wind, howling like something alive. An emergency dispatcher named Erin Price was among the last to leave the town hall before the generators died. Her husband, Cal, was a retired forest ranger, already growing anxious about the stranded people scattered throughout the mountains. Erin tried to reach anyone on the old shortwave radio in their home, but only got static, except once. Just after midnight, something crackled through the interference. Not a voice, but a sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on a window pane. The next day, Cal decided to try reaching a hunting cabin about 7 miles into the timberline, where he knew 3 teenage boys had gone on a winter trip. They hadn't returned, and no one had heard from them since the snow started. Erin begged him not to go, said the storm wasn't natural. Cal had seen strange weather in his time, but something about her voice unsettled him. She wasn't scared of the cold. She was scared of what was in it. Cal left at dawn with a pack, snowshoes, and a rifle. Erin stayed behind, alone in the dark, the windows frosted over like the house had been buried alive. Hours passed. Then more tapping on the glass, again like fingernails. She looked out. Nothing. She circled the house. Nothing. But when she turned back toward the door, she found something that made her knees buckle. A single bare footprint on the porch. No shoe, no sock, just a human foot half melted into the snow. Erin ran inside and locked every door. She turned off the lights and crouched under the kitchen table with a fire poker in her hand. The blizzard outside screamed against the house. Something, somewhere was pacing in the snow. Cal didn't return that night, nor the next. On the third day, the storm eased up just enough that a few snowmobiles managed to get into the edge of town from a nearby base. Erin led them into the mountains to find Cal. What they discovered wasn't the cabin. It was a clearing half buried in snow. And in the middle of it was Cal's rifle. Just the rifle. No footprints, no tracks. Like he'd simply vanished. The cabin was finally found 2 days later, and what they discovered inside would haunt the search party forever. The 3 teenage boys were there, what was left of them. Their bodies were huddled together in a corner, frostbitten and rigid. Their eyes were open, mouths frozen mid-scream. On the walls, scraped in something dark and clotted, were dozens of phrases, repetitive, frantic. Most were illegible, but one stood out clearly. It doesn't walk in the snow walks with it. A week later, when the blizzard had passed and power returned, Erin packed up and left Red Ash for good. But she never escaped what happened. Every year, when the temperature drops and the snow begins to fall, she hears that same tapping on windows that don't face the wind, on nights with no footprints. And she knows, somewhere out there in the white silence, the snow still walks.
Story number 2.
In January of 2007, a late-season blizzard swept through the Bitterroot Range of Montana. Among those caught in the storm was a small group of friends, 3 men and 1 woman, who had set off on what was supposed to be a 2-day backcountry snowboarding trip. Their names were Evan, Jake, Tyler, and Mia, all in their mid-20s and well acquainted with winter camping. They had high-end gear, satellite GPS, and confidence bred from experience. But nature doesn't care how prepared you think you are. The storm came in faster than expected, fat flakes falling like ashes from a sky gone completely white. The temperature plummeted to minus 15 degrees overnight. Wind howled through the trees like a living thing. By the second day, their GPS unit had frozen and died. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet. They weren't just lost, they were swallowed. They set up a makeshift shelter near what looked like the remains of a collapsed ranger station. Only a few half-buried timbers remained, jutting from the snow like splintered ribs. The snow didn't stop. They were low on food. Then things started changing. It was Mia who first said something felt off. During the night, she heard a low humming, like a voice speaking through ice. Tyler brushed it off as wind. But the next night, Evan woke up screaming, his face pale, lips cracked from the cold. He said someone had whispered his name right beside his ear, icy breath brushing his cheek. No one else heard it. That morning, they discovered something chilling, footprints in the snow around their shelter. Bare footprints. Human. No shoes, no socks, just raw feet pressed into the snow in a long, looping path. They circled the group's tent before disappearing into the woods. Jake said they must have hallucinated it. The cold could do that, he reasoned. But they took turns keeping watch that night. Nothing happened. No more voices, no more footprints. Then Tyler vanished. They woke up to find his sleeping bag unzipped and empty. No signs of a struggle, no trail in the snow. It was as if he'd simply melted away. Mia started to unravel. She kept mumbling about something she saw in the trees, something tall, pale, and watching. She begged them to leave the area, storm or not. With 2 days of food left, Evan and Jake agreed. They packed up and tried to follow the GPS coordinates they remembered. But after 6 hours of trudging, they found themselves back at the same remains of the ranger station. Their own tracks had disappeared. Snow continued to fall, heavy and silent. That night, Jake kept watch. He said Mia was sleeping fitfully, moaning. When he checked on her, her face was pale, expression twisted in a grimace. He shook her. Nothing. When he pulled back her sleeping bag, she was ice cold. Dead, but her eyes were wide open. Frost lined her lashes. Her lips were blue, and drawn into the snow, scrawled with a stick or a finger, were 3 words. It took her. Evan snapped. He ran into the snow, screaming her name, cursing the storm, the mountains, whatever unseen thing was out there. Jake chased after him, but Evan disappeared behind the wall of white. Jake was the only one found. A rescue team discovered him 3 days later, curled in the remnants of the collapsed ranger station, speaking in whispers and barely responsive. He was suffering from severe frostbite and hypothermia. When questioned later, Jake gave conflicting stories. In one version, he said a man had led him back to the shelter. In another, he claimed Mia had walked with him all night, only to vanish as the sun rose. But in every version, he said the same thing. It watches you when you stop moving. Of the others, no trace was ever found. No bodies, no gear, not even the footprints. Just a stretch of snow-covered wilderness where something old, something cold, something hungry, waits for those who dare to get lost in the blizzard.
Story number 3.
In the winter of 1993, a historic blizzard slammed into the northeastern United States with a ferocity that hadn't been seen in decades. Entire towns were buried under mountains of snow, power lines collapsed beneath the weight of ice, and roads vanished under whiteout conditions. Emergency services were immobilized. One such forgotten town was Alder Falls, a small, dying mining community tucked deep in the Pennsylvania Appalachians. By the time the snow began to fall, there were only 14 people left in Alder Falls, mostly elderly holdouts and a few scattered families. Among them was 26-year-old Jake Harrow, who had returned to care for his estranged father after a stroke. Jake hated Alder Falls. It reeked of decay, and the people there never let go of old grudges. But he stayed, out of guilt maybe, or just stubbornness. When the snowstorm hit, it did so with sudden, unnatural intensity. It was more than just wind and flakes. People said it screamed, not howled, screamed, like the wail of someone being torn apart. That first night, the snow fell so fast it blanketed the roads in minutes, sealing Alder Falls off from the rest of the world. The power died before midnight, then the phones, then the radio. Total isolation. By the second day, the town had gone quiet. Too quiet. Jake went door to door, checking on the few remaining residents, only to find 4 homes completely empty. No signs of a struggle, no footprints in the snow. Just doors left swinging in the icy wind, fires still burning low in the hearths. Jake assumed they had tried to flee and gotten lost in the storm, until he visited the Carter house. Inside, everything was frozen. Ice had crept in through the walls and ceiling, as if the house itself had begun to decay from within. The Carters, a couple in their 80s, were found huddled together in bed, frozen solid, but their faces were not peaceful. They were twisted in absolute terror, mouths open as if mid-scream. There were no footprints leading to or from the house, and every window was shut tight from the inside. That night, Jake heard the sound outside his window. It was soft at first, like whispering beneath the howl of the wind. Then it grew louder. Voices, indistinct but full of panic, pleading, screaming. One of them sounded like his mother, who had been dead for years. Jake didn't sleep. He sat in a chair with an axe across his lap, staring at the snow-covered window until dawn. The third day brought more vanishings. The Rogers twins, only 8 years old, were there one moment, playing in their living room, and gone the next. Their mother went insane, tearing apart the house with her bare hands trying to find them. Jake arrived too late. She'd gouged out her own eyes with a shard of broken mirror, muttering something about the pale ones in the storm. Panic spread. Those who remained huddled together in the old church at the center of town. The storm outside raged like a living thing. Snow smashed against the stained glass windows like fists. And then, one by one, the people began to see things, shapes moving through the snow. Not people, not animals, things. Tall, pale figures with no faces. They didn't move like they were walking. They glided, like smoke caught in a breeze. That night, Jake watched as one of them passed by the church doors. It didn't knock. It didn't try to enter. It just stopped and listened. He could hear it breathing through the wood. Heavy, wet breaths. Then it whispered his name. Not screamed, whispered, like it was right beside him. That's when he knew this storm wasn't natural. It had come for them, for Alder Falls, and it was feeding. On the 5th day, the last of the townsfolk broke. They ran into the storm, screaming and clawing at their own skin, saying they could feel it crawling beneath. Jake stayed behind, barricaded in the church, surrounded by candles and the last of the food. He knew he wouldn't survive much longer. But he wasn't going to give it the satisfaction of dragging him into the snow like it had the others. On the 7th day, the storm just stopped. Rescue teams arrived a day later, finding the town buried in silence. Every building was untouched, pristine in the snow, no bodies, no tracks, no sign of any struggle, all except the church where they found Jake Harrow, alive, starving, eyes bloodshot, hair turned white. He didn't speak for weeks, and when he did, all he could say was, "It watches when the snow falls, it waits, it listens." They called it a tragedy, a freak storm, a freak accident. But Jake knew the truth. The blizzard hadn't taken Alder Falls. It had fed on it.
Story number 4.
In January of 2003, a massive blizzard swept across northern Minnesota, paralyzing entire towns under feet of snow. Roads vanished, power lines snapped like brittle twigs, and temperatures dropped to levels where even a few minutes outside could cause frostbite. Emergency services were overwhelmed. But the story that still circulates in hushed tones at local bars and coffee shops isn't about the storm. It's about what happened to 4 friends who decided to ride it out in a remote cabin near the Canadian border. The cabin belonged to one of them, Chris. His grandfather had built it decades ago, deep in the woods, with no nearby neighbors, no cell service, and only a propane generator for power. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway. Chris, his girlfriend Molly, his best friend Nate, and Nate's younger brother Jeremy had gone up there with coolers of food, beer, and the kind of cocky invincibility only 20-somethings have. The forecast had warned of heavy snow, but none of them had expected a record-breaking blizzard. On the second night, the storm hit with a ferocity they couldn't have imagined. The wind screamed through the trees, rattling the windows and pressing snow hard against the walls. They lost power within the first hour. The generator had died, likely frozen or suffocated by snowdrifts. The temperature dropped quickly, and by midnight, all 4 of them were bundled in layers of clothes and blankets, huddled around a failing fireplace. That's when Molly heard the sound, faint, distant, but unmistakably human, a knocking. Not a branch scraping, not a falling icicle, but 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the front door. They all froze. "No one's out here." Chris whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Nobody could be." Nate grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the door, but the tiny beam was swallowed by the swirling white outside the windows. They waited, the silence more terrifying than the knock itself. Then it happened again. 3 more knocks. Chris, shaking, opened the door. Nothing, just a wall of snow. The wind shoved its way into the cabin, howling like an animal, and Chris slammed the door shut. But something was off. As he turned back, he noticed it immediately. There were wet footprints on the wooden floor, bare, human footprints. No boots, no shoes, just a trail of soggy, pale prints leading from the door into the hallway. They followed the trail, flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls. The prints led to the back room. The door was open, and inside the room was freezing. Jeremy stepped in first, and the flashlight flickered as if the battery were dying, though it had been fresh just hours ago. The footprints stopped dead in the center of the room. No return path. Just stopped. Nate swore he saw something in the corner, a shape too tall, too still. But when he pointed the light that way, there was nothing, just the old rocking chair. But it had moved. It was rocking slowly, back and forth. That night, they didn't sleep. They sealed the room shut and sat up with the fireplace, which barely kept them from freezing. At some point, Jeremy started mumbling to himself, muttering nonsense. He wouldn't respond when they asked what was wrong. Just stared into the fire, lips twitching. By morning, he was gone. They found the back door wide open, snow covering the floor, and Jeremy's footprints disappearing into the white woods. They searched until their voices went hoarse. But the snow was so thick, it was like the trees swallowed sound. They couldn't even hear each other if they got more than a few yards apart. Eventually, they gave up and huddled in the cabin, too afraid to call for him anymore, because the night before, something had answered back when Molly screamed his name. Not in his voice. Not human. On the third day, Nate went to the generator shed, determined to get it running. He never came back. Chris went after him, found the shed door hanging open, snow packed inside. But no Nate, just something carved into the wooden wall, deep and uneven, like it had been gouged with fingernails. Let them in. Chris and Molly tried to leave, but the snow had trapped the truck completely. The storm hadn't let up. They were stranded. By the fifth night, Chris was hallucinating, talking to someone in the back room, someone only he could see. Molly tried to get him to snap out of it, but he turned on her, screaming that she wasn't the real one. She locked herself in the bathroom and listened as he whispered to things that didn't answer him, things that didn't exist. When rescue teams finally found the cabin, they said it looked like it had been abandoned for years. Snow sealed every door, and the inside was coated in frost as if the storm had gotten in. They only found Molly, barely alive, eyes open, lips cracked, hands frostbitten to the bone. She wouldn't speak. She still hasn't. She just draws, over and over, that same image. A tall figure, no eyes, no mouth, just a head bent slightly sideways as if listening. And next to it, 4 small dots, like footprints in the snow. Only 3 ever came back.